actually something I've been inherently interested in for the last couple of years, coming from a smaller but very rapidly growing university as the University of the Sunshine Coast is. After about a year, I suppose 6 months of being in the role, it was very apparent that things were going to be changing very, very quickly. So I've sort of had a continuing interest on the structures or systems or models around research, graduate research leadership. And so I'm happy to be able to give this talk today. Just so we're clear about what I'm actually going to talk about, it's not about pathways into PhDs, or it's not about any of those sorts of training type things. It's really about the leadership system. And I've just got a very sort of simple summary there of what that might constitute. So it's the components, roles, connections and organisations which lead graduate research within a university. And that includes things from a student's perspective like admissions, training and development, progression, things like confirmation of candidature, mid-candidature review, those types of things, and then of course the examination process. From a supervisor's perspective, a lot of universities have registers of supervisors. I know some don't, but that's one thing that this leadership system would entail, and the training and development of supervisors. And rightly or wrongly, at most institutions, scholarships are wound up in this somewhere. So this HDR or graduate research leadership system needs to take scholarships into account, both the selection of those and also the monitoring of the success of those selections. If you take nothing else away from what I say today, it's going to be that there's a huge range across the sector within Australia here about with regard to the type of systems that are in place for the management for graduate research students. And just to try and put that into some sort of context, within Australia here we've got universities that have less than 300 graduate research students, and we've got institutions that have got more than 5,000 graduate research students. Now, along with that, some of those, like the one that I'm from and many others of the smaller universities, are growing very, very rapidly. So the systems around their leadership are quite different and change quite differently than the other universities that are perhaps more established, and their numbers don't change. They might be increasing slightly, but certainly not at the percentage points of the other universities. And also there's a very large range of the link between the academic and the administrative systems within these sort of leadership components. There really are no rules about this. If you talk to 100 people, you'll get 100 different answers, it seems, and there's probably 100 different systems. And there's also no standard system either. What might work at one institution won't necessarily work somewhere else, even if the two institutions are the same size and have very similar sort of research profiles. There's three sort of basic models, if you like, and rather than show you a whole bunch of org charts, I'm just going to sort of walk through here in text some differences between those, and then I'll show you a very simplified model at the end of the common components of all of those models. A lot of universities have graduate research schools, and typically the older, more established universities will have those, and what we might call the middle range universities or medium-sized universities will have those. A lot of small universities don't have a separate and independent graduate research school, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. At the bigger institutions, there may be graduate research schools at the university level, but there may also be graduate research schools at the faculty levels, independent graduate research schools at the faculty level. A lot of universities seem to start out with some sort of centrally based model where the numbers allow everything to come through one central system, if you like. But as they grow, and this has just happened to us recently, we've gotten to the point where a lot of these things are being distributed out to the faculties now. With a central model, obviously everything goes through there, from admissions all the way through to thesis or examination. The faculty models, the majority of them tend to handle admissions and progression, but when it comes to the examination process, in most cases that goes back to a central component, and typically with supervision too. If there is a register of supervisors, that's typically handled centrally and not out at the faculties. The involvement of school levels, and I'm sorry if your institution has a whole lot of different names for faculty, schools, levels, departments, whatever. I'm using them at the three levels: university, faculty and school as general terms. The involvement of the school, it seems to be quite varied across universities. Some the heads of school are involved in various processes, maybe in administrations, but admissions, but not in confirmations. So that varies a lot, and the roles that people have within schools, whether they be associate deans or coordinators, there's a large range there as well. This I found really interesting when I was looking a couple of years ago, and I'll talk about that a bit more in a minute, whether a graduate school was the right thing for us to do. If you take two org charts that look very, very similar, one may have a grad school and one may not. There's a lot of overlap in terms of the actual functions, but they can function actually quite differently. So one may have a grad school and one may not. So there's no given, just because you're this big and you have this many students, that you should have a graduate school. That's not the situation. As I said, there's differences in academic and administrative alignment, and at some point the international office is involved in this, and that might not just be due to the with the admission, it might be later on with visa extensions and a whole range of other things too. So there's an interaction there that in most cases happens in parallel. Having said that, there's a whole range of things. There are some common components, roles, connections and organisation. Typically these leadership structures or models, if you like, fall within the research section of the university. So they're typically under the responsibility of the DVCR or whatever the PVCR, whatever the equivalent person at your university is. They're typically led by a Dean of Graduate Studies. And most systems will have someone at the faculty level, some sort of academic leader, at least at the faculty level. It'll go further down, and again, that's not a function of size. We, even at our institution, which is quite small, we have academic leaders in each of the 8 schools that we have. There's typically a director of some sort of administrative component, and that may run in parallel, just like the international office, that may run in parallel to the academic system. And of course the international office get involved. So this is a very, very simplified model of what I could pick out as the very basic common components across all the systems that are out there. I've purposely left the international office on the side there because they really get involved in admissions, and perhaps not too much until right to the end, if at all, with some candidates. So they're sort of operating in parallel. But there's a DVC research at the top. There's typically and this is the academic component in the middle, the Dean of Graduate Research. Underneath that, there'll be someone at the faculty level. Now, depending on the size of the institution, that might be an individual or it might be a whole committee. The faculty might have their own research degrees committee or graduate research committee. And the same down at the school level. We have some schools that have, we've got a new law school and it's got about 5 students in there, but that's still got an HDR coordinator. One of the things about smaller universities is just because you have less students doesn't mean that your research doesn't have the same breadth as a big university. So it's necessary to have discipline experts, irrespective of the number of students they have. Now, the people at the school level may have different responsibilities, but typically there'll be someone there. And then across on the right-hand side there is the administrative component. They're sort of the common components of a very, very simple model. I want to go back now and talk about a graduate research school, which may or may not have fit into that model. Typically, it's an independent academic unit. It'll have its own, so in that context, it's got complete control and responsibility for all the graduate research training, so there's no one else to blame. It'll typically have its own budget, which is different than some of the other models. A lot of the deans at smaller institutions operate with no budget and go begging all the time. Staffing, complete control over the way they want to run their coursework or anything like that, and the staffing that goes along with that. Coursework we've talked about a little bit already. If you've got a graduate research school, you've got the opportunity, if you're an independent academic unit, you've got the opportunity to mandate coursework and things like that, and to make the coursework and conduct the coursework, or sorry, I should say design and conduct it, but also to assess it. And that's not necessarily the case if you don't have if you're not functioning as a separate academic unit. One of the concerns that sometimes is brought up about having a graduate research school is that they become detached from the faculties, and that connection is lost, and that might become dysfunctional in some way. I've got a little note in there, prompt to myself, about a meeting or a session at an ACGR meeting 2015, so 2 years ago. I'd been in my role for about a year and was thinking, where we're going to be in 5 years' time. We're only small, but maybe a grad school's another 5 years down the road. Better start thinking about it and convince all the powers that this is a good idea. So I went into that session and there were some great presentations, and I went in there thinking, okay, I'm going to come out of this, I'm going to know exactly what we're going to do and how to do it. And it was a bit like going in, I apologise if there's any statisticians, but I enjoy stats, but you go along to a statistician and ask a couple of simple questions and you come out with a whole lot more questions and no answers. So, and that session was similar, and it was, as I said, great presentations, but I really came out feeling that, wow, there's a whole lot of org charts there, there's a whole lot of overlap, some have got grad schools, some haven't. Where do we fit in? So again, there was no real sort of definitive, if you're this big and you need this to happen, then you should have a grad school. So yes, no standard system. Sorry, I should mention, the how though was actually very clear. And that's really about making sure that the people above your role are behind you in this, and that came through very, very clearly, because you might sort of go into this thinking, okay, this is good for everyone, the students want it, the supervisors want it, we all know we're doing the right thing, but that might not be on the agenda for that university at that point in time. So it was very clear that you need to get everybody's support, and probably even the support of the people who aren't necessarily that involved. So I'm just going to give you, I think there's 4 just org charts. I won't name the institutions. This is a sort of a medium-sized one, and this is their org chart for their grad school. So it fits under a DVC research as a dean of research, actually. So this is why this one's slightly different. And then over to the left, I've just actually was informed when I was given this that under the graduate research school, there's now a dean there, but for many, many years there wasn't. So this is one situation where the Dean of Research at the school, and this happens at several universities, is part of their responsibility is to be the Dean of Graduate Studies, in fact. This one's very, very different. Again, a medium-sized, fairly research-intensive university. There's a Dean of Graduate Studies at the top there. The reason I put this one up, if you look down the right-hand side there, there's a whole lot of administrators within the graduate school, which, I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but it's not necessarily typical of the graduate school. They might be out in faculty land or in other places. This is a smaller university, very active in terms of industry engagement, and this is their org chart for their graduate school around their industry-linked PhD program. So this is a very specific group of people that work just on their industry-related PhD program, which is a 4-year program. You can see there's some project officers there. The administrative part is quite small, but those 3 people, the associate lecturers I think they are, they're all employed by the grad school to deliver their research training for this particular program, and specifically because it's an industry-related one and they've got specific courses for that. And this final one here is a larger metropolitan university, and learning skills over on the left-hand side here. The important part with this one that it's completely devoid of any administration. So this is purely academic. The administration is run completely separately in this situation. So there is no rules, and there's no standard system. Different universities require different things at different times. A lot of it seems to be a function of the size of the university. Once it gets to a certain size, things need to be devolved out. The age, and I put age there, it could have been tradition, I may have put in there as well. Sometimes at bigger places things are a little bit more difficult to change. Structures, of course, there's academic and administration. And adaptation to change is another thing that needs to be taken into account when you're thinking